Do you want to know how to break through mental barriers when running? We are talking about gaining mental strength and how you can improve your mindset and decrease anxiety so you can get out of your own way in achieving your goals in not only running, but in life. If your mind has become your biggest obstacle with your running, then you will want to continue to listen as we have someone here with us who has detailed her 7-year journey to overcome mental barriers and qualify for the iconic Boston Marathon. Welcome to episode 133 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury-free running. Today, we have a very special guest with us. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Clor is a 31-time marathoner, 12-time Boston Qualifier, and author of the book I just finished reading yesterday, Boston Bound, which details her 7-year journey to overcome mental barriers and qualify for the Boston Marathon. Thank you so much for accepting my invite, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be able to chat with you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be a guest on your podcast.
Yeah, guys. So in this episode, we're going to be chatting about some common problems many runners face, which stems from really getting out of our own way and out of our own minds. And I'm sure many of you are going to be able to relate to Elizabeth's story, and you've probably been there before, whether it was just for like a run, a training run that is, or maybe it was a race, or maybe it is every time you go out there. So in this episode, Elizabeth's going to really share 8 key principles that have helped her overcome her mental barriers and put into practice not only for her running, but into everything she does in life. We're going to also kind of do a little deep dive into the problem Elizabeth was facing as she struggled to get that elusive BQ and how she overcame this to go on and run another 11 Boston qualifying times, which is just absolutely amazing, by the way. So Elizabeth, on the show, we always start with what we call a little dynamic warm-up because we're all about movement here at Healthy Runner. I shared a brief bio, but can you tell the listeners where you call home and give us a little bit more backstory on how you've gotten to this point in your running journey?
Sure. So I am here in Northern Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. I was born and raised here. I've lived here my whole life, except for the 4 years when I was in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia studying English. And that was my major. So it's always been a dream of mine to write a book, and I hope to write more of them. Topic TBD. In terms of my running, how I got here, I started running when shortly after I graduated college. I graduated in the year 2000, and I was sort of looking for like a hobby or something to do. And I decided I was going to go to the gym and get healthy, and that would serve as a hobby, and it would also be good for me. I had never really had a gym membership. I was a dancer all throughout growing up as a child and high school and in college. But then when you graduate college, it's sort of a very difficult time. Here you are thrust into adulthood, and you don't have the structure. There's no more sororities. There's no more grades. So I was always this sort of big overachiever, and it's like, well, what am I going to achieve? I had a career, but that wasn't really going very well for me at that time. So I was looking for something that I just could feel a little bit more in control in. So I went to a gym and started, mainly wanted to take step aerobics because that was the closest thing to dancing I could find. And step aerobics in 2001 was like all the rage. Everyone was doing it. If you don't know what step aerobics is, you're probably a lot younger than me. It's basically where you have this step and it's aerobics and you step over it and side to side and jump over it. And there's cool little dance moves that go with it. It's like the Zumba of like the early 2000s, late 90s. Anyway.
Yeah. That's a good way to sum that up. My wife used to love those classes, by the way.
But then my class wasn't offered, it was only offered twice a week. And I had this very expensive gym membership for someone who just graduated college and whose career wasn't going well. So I decided I needed to get my money's worth. So when I wasn't doing step aerobics on those days, I decided I was going to sort of work on my endurance by running on a treadmill because it felt like it'd be like the easiest machine to use, because all the other machines intimidated me. I'm like, well, this one you just hit go and you just run. I can do that. So I started off by doing like 1 mile. I ran it. I think I had the treadmill set to like 5.6, 5.7. And by the end of that mile, I was like so totally winded. But then I stuck with it. And ultimately able to run 2, 3, 4 miles. And so I was a treadmill runner. I love the treadmill. I had my music, gym was super convenient. And I did treadmill for like 4 or 5 years, until I went 5 years after graduation. I went to my college reunion, and there was this like 2 mile race. And my roommate's like, instead of going to the gym and running on the treadmill, why don't you do this 2 mile race? I'm like, okay, sure. 2 miles isn't very much for me, but I can always go to the gym after. So different mindset from what I have now. And so I did that 2 mile race, and I was the first female finisher, which was unexpected. And I won like, a little award, and it was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then the guy who I ran it with, which is someone I graduated with, he's like, hey, you're a pretty good runner. You should do this 10K that's in DC next weekend. I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, just come out and here's all the information. So I came out and I ran this big, huge 10K. Lawyers have heart. And there was like a chip timing and like thousands of people, probably like 2,000-3,000 people. And it was really exciting. I had no clue what I was doing, but I would typically run 6 or 7 miles on the treadmill. So, but I was not an outdoor runner, but I did it. It was really hot, and I really liked it. So from there, that's sort of how I got into racing. It was just opened up this whole new world of, and there's half marathons and there's marathons. I kind of just never really knew that existed. To me, it was just, I was happy with the treadmill. I was sort of in my own world with it. And then once I realized that these like 10K, half marathon, 5K things existed, I was like super, super into it. And so that's sort of how my running career got kicked off. That first 10K there was in 2005. And I'm still doing it today.
Oh my goodness. And yeah, you've done a lot in your running journey. And I just love that, because I think so many people can relate. I know I surely can relate. Number one, the fact that you graduated in 2000 during the Y2K craze, and the world didn't end. Remember when we thought the world was going to end in 2000 with the millennium? And I graduated in 2001. So I remember those step aerobics classes. Yeah, we used to do them at the gym. And I actually started out my running journey very similar to yours, in that I was a treadmill runner just before my workouts. I was more of a gym rat like you describe. And the other thing that we have in common, which you probably wouldn't expect me to say, is that I grew up as a dancer. So yeah, I didn't do any sports kind of in high school and stuff. I was dancing, and, I did dance all throughout. And then in college, I didn't have competitive teams at that time. We had a little dance company. So I did that for 4 years in college. But yeah, when I heard that about you, I was like, see, we always have things in common. There's actually a lot of runners that I come into contact. So you are probably like the 5th person, besides like Allie Feller that I've had on the show, like our mutual friend, Shauna Miller from Stiletto Running. She's also a dancer. And I feel like there's been a bunch of people who have like been dancers, and now as adults, we become runners. And that's kind of what we do to kind of stay in physical shape, and then for a challenge, because you don't see many adult dancers.
Right.
So one of the things that also I really was impressed with is because I actually, started following you on Instagram through Shauna's page. She's been on the show before, and she's local here in Connecticut. And, I started seeing some things on Instagram. I was following your page. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And I saw, you had your book, and I just, shared with the listeners that I've been really investing in my own mental health, and, trying to wind down more before bed, get better restful sleep. And I started reading, and I've never read before. So I started reading 2 books, and I saw your book, and I was like, hey, why don't I try a running book? And I've just absolutely loved it. I've been reading it on the weekends at the beach, reading it before bed. It's been really, really great read. So we'll definitely get into some of the specifics in the book itself and kind of your actionable strategies. I just really love how you kind of detail like those 8 key principles, on your journey in qualifying for Boston at the end. But then I also have some other, questions for you along the way. Does that sound like a plan for today?
It does, absolutely.
Awesome. And by the way, guys, first off, just to pitch the book, if you are interested in any of this stuff, you can definitely get Elizabeth's book. We'll give you all the information at the end, but you can get it on Amazon. And it is really, really great read, especially for you running nerds out there, as if you want to know details of running, but then also really more importantly, in how to honestly not obsess so much. Like that's my big take home of the whole book here, not to spoiler alert, but not to have running overtake your lives, right? Like we love running and it's a part of our lives, but it should be a part and not be overtaking your lives. So I guess, just in a little bit of reflection or retrospect, can you just share with us why you did actually write this book?
Yeah, I definitely felt like I went through this sort of epiphany and I became, I want to say, sort of like a different person. I had this big, huge weight lifted off of me, and it was this huge sense of relief. And it really just affected everything that I did, not just my running, but how I saw myself, how I saw the world, how I interacted with people. And I became more relaxed. I was always this super uptight perfectionist, type A, probably wasn't very fun. Always just focusing on, what can I achieve? How can I be better? And putting a lot of pressure on myself. And through this process of working with a sports psychologist, I just was really able to just be a lot more laid back. And it just felt so incredible that I thought that maybe there are other people out there who were struggling with the same things, maybe not even realizing it. Like I didn't even realize that being a perfectionist is necessarily not a great thing. Like, oh, you're a perfectionist. You strive to be perfect. How can that not be good? So, just identifying that some of these things can be a little bit problematic. It just really changed my world. And I had the idea of writing a book. My husband just really encouraged me to actually do it. There's a lot of people like, oh, I should write a book. But it's very hard to actually sit down and put pen to paper. But I did have that discipline. My husband, as I said, encouraged me. And my purpose in writing it was A, to document everything for myself so I'd have it as a record. And then B, to put it out there to help anyone who may be having similar issues. I honestly didn't really expect the book was going to sell. Now, maybe it will, maybe it won't, maybe just be my friends. Maybe it'll be like 20, 30 copies. It's actually really done really well. So
that's amazing. Yeah. Kudos to you for kind of, taking that risk. And what I really love about the book itself is it's not just you writing after the fact, you're putting actual excerpts because you are actually documenting this on your blog, while you were going through that journey. So it's kind of cool to see what your mindset was at a particular race or at a particular point and see, actually what you were writing at that time. I thought that was really neat. And I would imagine that was a lot of work to go back and, to kind of get the information from those blogs. But I thought that was a nice touch in the book itself and how you had the specific excerpts from your blog, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So let's get into these 8 key principles to overcome mental barriers. So what would be the first principle that you would like to share?
Well, the first, now, if we go through all 8, this may take a really long time. So maybe some we'll do more in depth, maybe some we won't.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll go in order. The first one being separate yourself from a person, from the things that you do. And I was a runner. That was who I was. And if I wasn't good at running, or if I wasn't meeting my running goals, and who was I? It was just, I was throwing everything I was into my identity as a runner, Elizabeth the runner, that's who I was. And I had to really learn to just kind of take that out and say, running is one thing that I do. I care a lot about it. It is a big part of my life, but it's not who I am. And how do I define myself? I don't define myself by the things I do, by my job, by my grades, by my relationships. I define myself by what I put out into the world. What are my values? I'm dedicated. I'm passionate. I'm creative, those types of things. Those are the things that I should be valuing myself for, versus valuing myself for things that sort of require this external validation and that can come and go and aren't always in my control. Because no matter what, when it comes down to it, I am me, and no matter what I do, I bring things into it, like my hard work and my dedication and that. So just having that separation and not defining yourself by your running or by really any accomplishment. Like a lot of people can get tied up in their career, like I'm a doctor, I'm an attorney, this is who I am. No, it's really just better psychologically if you don't look at yourself as just the thing that you do.
Yeah, no, I think that is so important. And I think that, it probably would help if we gave some of the listeners some context in kind of your running journey prior to, going from kind of treadmill runner to doing the 2-mile race that you did, then doing the 10K, started marathoning, which was kind of walk run for many races. Right. And then you made some like significant improvements with every single race. We're PRing every single race, but really the problem stemmed or started, like the problem at that time that you were going through with mental barriers when you set your goals pretty high, right? So what was the goal that you set?
Well, the goal was to qualify for Boston. And when I ran my first marathon and I got a 4:46, I just didn't think, I was like, oh, the Boston's for the fast people. That's just not anything I would ever really can see myself doing. It's just not realistic. But then, 2 years later, less than 2 years after it, I had gotten my time down to 3:51. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, at the time I only needed a 3:40. So now I'm only 11 minutes away and I already have shaved over or almost an hour off of my time. And so now it's time to just shave 11 minutes off and get to Boston. And before that, like these marathons had just kind of been for fun and they just been like, let's see, maybe shave a few minutes off. But now things got serious and my sort of type A personality kicked in. And I set that goal and I became active in the running community and I shared it with friends and teammates and everything like that. And it just became this thing that I set out to do.
Right. And during that process and that journey, because many runners, when they start out, and, I myself probably didn't call myself a runner until 5 years, into running, and many people don't get that label, right? Did you call yourself a runner right away, or was it when you reached a certain level of running?
I think it was maybe after I had done like 1 or 2 marathons. I remember like other people calling me a runner before I called myself a runner. Like I had met a bunch of people on MySpace who also ran and they were like, oh, she's a runner. I'm like, no, I'm not really a runner. I've just done a few races. It doesn't make me a runner just because I've raced, a few times. But then after you've done 1 or 2 marathons, it's sort of, you consider yourself a runner.
Right. And I think that was definitely the first MySpace drop on the podcast ever. So shout out to those who were born in the 70s and remember MySpace. That's awesome. So I think this is interesting, right? Because most of us who start running, we don't call ourselves a runner till a certain point, whether it is how many races we did, how fast we are, how many years we've been doing it. But the other side that you're talking about in this first principle is kind of separating yourself from just being a runner, right? Yeah. Where the pendulum can shift the other way too far, right? We're not giving ourselves enough credit. Then we're just identifying only as a runner. So I think that's an important distinction. And I think that is a very, very important point, in setting some of those boundaries. All right. So second principle to overcome mental barriers.
So that would be focusing on the things you can control and not on the things that you can't control. And so that's sort of with the sport of running, with the perfectionist sort of black and white mindset, the temptation is to think, well, if I follow this plan and I hit all these paces in training, then I'm going to go to the race and I'm going to get the goal, because that's what all the calculators say. That's what the training plan says. But then you get to the race and then it's like really hot, or it's humid, or there's like a ton of wind, or you have a digestive issue. I mean, there's like so many things that can happen that are not within your control. That can just get in the way of your goals. So, and then once one or two of those things happen, all of a sudden that's like, oh my God, what if it's hot? I've worked so hard, and what if it's going to be really windy? Oh no. So focusing on the things that you can't control really isn't going to help you in any way, shape, or form. It's not going to help you meet your goal. I mean, it's good to know what the weather's going to be so you can like dress appropriately and be prepared, but just harboring on it, or obsessing over it is not really, it's hurting you more than it's helping you. So it's really just sort of understanding. It's sort of like when alcoholics are trying to overcome their addiction, they have the serenity prayer, like to help, asking God to help them focus on what they can control, not the things that they can't, and then the wisdom to know the difference. And that is very important for everyone, no matter who you are.
Yeah, and I think you detail that well in the book, as far as in, like you mentioned, weather in a lot of those beginning races, and how much you talked about in your like race reports of how hot it was, and you don't run well in the heat. And for you, 50 something degrees would be like perfect for someone, but for you, it was just like way too hot. And you can see that was like an element of focus early on, which, as you went on in your journey, you can see that, lessened to a certain extent. And one thing that was really like shocking for me to see in the book was when you talked about the 3 levels of performance, according to Neil, your sports psychologist. And I thought that was like very interesting, because I always thought about, hey, I don't have control when I go out there. I'm going to give my best effort. But he was really talking about, and he talked about that really everyone who finishes a race, that 50% of the people fall in the quote unquote bottom line, which is basically things didn't go their way. 30% fall in that mid range, and only 20% are actually at that upper end and hitting PRs. Yeah. And I was like, wow, like that just gives you such a different level of perspective, because I know there are many runners out there, and I've, guilty as charged, I have felt bad for myself. And, it varies in terms of how bad that feeling is, right? Minutes, seconds, maybe even a little bit longer, that I wasn't in that upper end. But when you think about it, and if you do enough races, chances are you're not going to be in that upper end many times. So I thought that was like really, really like eye-opening to me to see those stats.
Yeah. I mean, he had those stats. It's like you go to the finish line to like your local 5K or any marathon, really only going to be 20% of the people that are like, oh yeah, I just absolutely crushed it. I totally PR'd. It's sort of more the exception, not the rule, where everything's going to go well. And the more you race and the more experience you get, the less likely you are, because the ones that are setting the PRs, most of them are going to be the ones that this is their like second or third race. So they have a huge untapped potential, versus if you've already done 10 marathons, you're probably not going to be doing that like 20-minute PR. It's highly unlikely.
Right. And I feel like, especially for people maybe who don't run or in the beginning of running, when you say you did a race and they're like, oh, do you PR? And you like feel bad, right? Because you're like, oh, they expected me to PR. But it's like, hey, only 20%. Now that's going to be my response. Like, no, I did not PR, but did you know only 20% of the people who run races do?
That's right.
All right. So third strategy or tip, what is that?
That is, do not speculate. Set expectations on the process, not the outcome. So this what if game, sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. I think actually that might be another one, but like sort of speculating on the outcomes and not really, hold on, let me see what my notes are on that. Yeah. Expectations on the process, not the outcome. So when you set expectations on the process, things like, I'm going to take my gels at these miles. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to have this to eat. I'm going to hydrate. I'm going to make sure I do this warm up. I'm going to run the first few miles at this pace. If you sort of set expectations around that and you don't speculate about what your time is going to be, you're just going to be in a better mindset, because then you're focused on all the right things that are going to get you to your goal versus just the end goal. If you're just focused on the number itself, that's actually not going to really help you get to the number. You got to focus on the things that are going to get you to your goal, the process.
Yeah. And I've definitely heard a lot more about that of late. So I think this is a really important concept for those listening to really think about those process goals versus just the number. And speaking from someone who is like nowhere close to my half marathon PR, which was like 7 years ago. And so, I've run 28, I think it is, half marathons. And, I just actually shared my kind of half marathons lessons learned from my recent race 2 weeks ago on the podcast. And, one of those things as I was reflecting and really going back is exactly what you're talking about, is really the process. And, hey, did I execute a, good race strategy? Did I execute my nutrition, my hydration? Did I not let my mind get to those negative thoughts during the race when things got hard? And I think that is so important, and I think speaks to the maturity of a runner. And I think the sooner that you try to set those goals for yourself as a runner, you will be less disappointed after your efforts and after your races, because you are focusing on exactly what you said, on the process and not the actual outcome. So I just love that one. All right. Next one's about emotions, right?
Yes. Stay neutral. Don't let emotions prevent you from doing your best. And this one actually kind of came out when I was working with my sports psychologist. I was telling them about a race. So whenever I did a race, I'd go in and I'd talk to Neil and I would tell him about the race. And I said, well, at one point there was this person running near me and they had their music on like loud so everyone could hear it. And it wasn't headphones. It was just blasting. And the song, I didn't like it. And it kind of annoyed me. And I was like, I couldn't get away from these people. And then he's like, what did you say? I said, I didn't like it. He's like, okay, well, what you like and what you don't like is irrelevant. So you're going to be best if you just stay neutral. So when things happen to you in a race, like someone runs by you with loud music, or there's some sort of weird hill or some weird thing in the course, because that's happened to me a lot, like some crazy hairpin turn, which in the past like super annoy me or whatever it could be. You got to just stay neutral. Like, don't let those things distract you from your goal. Don't get upset about them. Don't focus on them. Don't think about that person's music. Just sort of tune it out, accept that it's there, maybe observe it, like if you have to observe it, but no. And that also necessarily is also not necessarily don't be overly happy. I mean, smile and be happy that you're there, but just be focused and be present, and just stay neutral. And that's really the sort of emotionless while you're doing it will actually lead to the best success in terms of performance.
Right. And you think about like pros, right? Whether it's runners or any athlete, it's like those that are like even keeled, right? They definitely seem to perform the best because they don't let the highs get too high, the lows get too low. So that one makes sense to me. All right. So the fifth strategy
is to seek out positive emotions, which may seem counterintuitive to emotion neutral, but that's sort of like after the fact. So when you're done with your performance, then you're trying to seek out the positive, because if you had what you may otherwise consider a bad race where your time was slower and you don't think you did very well, don't focus on that. Focus on like, what are the positive things and what are the positive emotions? Was it a good experience? Did you travel to a new state or a new city and did you see new scenery? Did you meet new people? Did you have fun? Did you get good race photos? Like things like that. It's not everything is about a PR. So when you can, if you have a race and you don't do well and you kind of start harping on it and then you look back on that, you're much more likely to remember like all those negative experiences and sort of go into the next race with a chip on your shoulder. Well, I don't want that to happen again. The best way is just to focus on the positive. Not to say that you can't be disappointed, but focusing on the positive emotions so that you're not bringing a bunch of negativity with you from that race into the next race. A little bit is fine because sometimes that can like fuel your fire. You're like, I'm determined not to do that again. But also just not being too hard on yourself and realizing that once again, this is running when most of us are not professionals, we're doing it for fun. So if we're not having positive emotions around it, like joy and excitement and fun and things like that, then why are we doing it? Why are we doing a sport that's not making us happy and it's not making us enjoy life? And that's what it should be doing.
Right. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I know we actually we have to have this conversation sometimes, even with clients in our program, who they tell us like, hey, I hate running. And it's like, well, if you hate running and like we've tried, these strategies, like number one, no one says you need to run, right? Like let's find an activity of exercise that you actually want to do, right? That brings you joy. But I think this definitely was something that I noticed in within the book in your post race reports, where you really were writing about like the race reflection, and you talked about like believing in yourself and your ability to like work hard during a race that didn't go your way, or the one that was super cold or the one that was like super rainy, right? And keeping your running separate from your other life. Like I love the stories about you and your husband and other things that were going on in your life. And then the other thing that resonated with me in the book was just having some patience with yourself, and then letting yourself actually run without judgment. I think that's definitely important, where a lot of times we will judge, right? And wonder what others are kind of thinking and how we're judging our performance itself. So yeah, I think those were great. All right. Tip number 6, or strategy number 6.
It kind of relates to what we just talked about. Quickly move past the setbacks and focus on forging ahead. So my sports psychologist always said, disappointment is natural and you should let yourself feel disappointed. But the quicker you don't want to shove the emotions under the carpet and just ignore them, because then they're going to come back. So you have your disappointment, you deal with it, you learn from it. But the quicker you can just focus on what's next, just the better off you'll be. You don't want this negativity looming from past races, because you're just making it worse. Like if you didn't get your goal and you were upset about it, stewing in it is not helping. I know it's sort of like the easy thing to do, but you just got to be stronger and get past it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know you had talked about earlier in your races about, you stewing for like days, right? And really letting it affect your life, really, essentially. And even like you talked about like going into work and, things like that. And so that makes sense to kind of, feel the emotions, feel the feels, but like, let's get over it and move on. So that makes sense. And this other one, I think, is going to be a very common one here, the old comparison trap. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so number 7, don't compare yourself to other people. And I think that if I had to pick like the one of all the 8, this number 7 is probably for me the biggest one. And I had actually been to a therapist way back, I think I want to say in 2003, who gave me this sort of personality test. And I said, well, what's the result of the test, therapist? And she said, what struck me most about how you responded to the test was that you really, really, really care about what other people think of you, like abnormally so. That was like the biggest thing that stuck out. And I was a people pleaser my whole life. I didn't really have any internal validation. I judged myself on external factors like my grades and was I going to get on the dance team? How successful was I going to be? Like, did I have the right clothing? Like all of these external things. And that was just my automatic kind of way of being. And I had to work really hard with the sports psychologist on this. The therapist that I had in the early 2000s didn't really help me. I think we just didn't have anything tangible to work with. But when you have something like running, where you're sort of in it every day, you have something tangible to work with. So When I said earlier, when I first came on about why I wrote the book, and I said I had an epiphany, I can actually pinpoint the very moment when I had this epiphany. And it was when I was injured, or I was coming sort of off of an injury. One summer in 2013, I was registered for the Chicago Marathon in, I guess, October, and it was July, and I had this injury, and the Chicago had always been on the bucket list. I was registered, my husband was registered, and I was kind of thinking to myself, gosh, you know, I'm not going to have, I'm only going to have like 6 or 7 weeks to train because of this injury. It's not going to be a really good time. And at this point, I'd been in sports psychology for well over a year. And he had been telling me, don't focus on what other people think. He'd been hammering this. And it had been logically, I knew that I shouldn't care about what other people thought, but I didn't really embrace it. So I found myself thinking, you know, I'm going to go to Chicago and it's just going to be this like 4-hour marathon. And other people are just going to say, oh gosh, she didn't do very well. You know, she only ran a 4-hour. And I caught that thought and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I thinking that? Do I want to run Chicago? Yes. Is it on the bucket list? Yes. Am I going to still be able to cover the distance despite this injury? Yes. So am I going to let what someone else thinks of me prevent me from going out and doing this bucket list marathon? That would just be limiting myself. And I realized, oh my God, I was just holding myself back. I was considering just not even running Chicago because of what other people would think of my finish time. And that's really just not being very nice to myself. And so I'm like, yes, I'm going to do Chicago, and whatever the time is, it is. And I'm going to be proud that I did it, and I'm not going to care. And it like literally felt like this huge burden was lifted. And then like for like the next rest of the week and the next week, I just sort of was noticing that like, why do I care what other people think? It's only hurting me. And I just had this like, oh, I'm free. Like I didn't realize that I wasn't free before. And the title Boston Bound, there's a double entendre there. Like it means that like I'm bound up in this need to qualify for Boston. Like I felt like I was bound in chains. And so at this moment, I felt like I was absolutely free from my own sort of chains that I had wrapped myself up in my Boston obsession. So that's actually why the book is called Boston Bound. It's not just like, hey, we're going to Boston. No, it's like bound up.
I like that. I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, most people don't. Like the cover of like sort of Unbreaking, there's these chains.
Yeah.
That's like finish line tape, but they're actually chains that are coming undone.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And so when you free yourself from other people's opinions, you live a much different life. And when I realized that, my life became different. And that is why I wrote the book. And that is the most important. I put it as number 7, but to me, that's the most important.
Yeah. And there's so much of that I could relate to in my personal life and journey. Like you, I grew up, I was like middle child, right? Like single mom growing up. And it was like, you always want to do good. You always wanted to get, that award. And, I was definitely that person as well. And, it took me a real long time, but I finally can say that I'm at that point in my career where, hey, I don't really care. Not that I don't care, right? It's not that I don't care, but I'm going to be my authentic, true self, right? Yeah. And I'm a physical therapist who's an academician and, had a PhD and stuff, but I have a podcast because I like to do this and I like to give back to my running community. And in the beginning, it was tough because there was a lot of judgment, like, oh, that's not professional, or, you can't do that on social media, and you can't. And, once I finally broke free of the worrying about what others thought or said, or wasn't what people expected, then I was able to live a much freer and happier life. So I can relate to some of what you're speaking about there. And yeah, I think that's huge. Like I have 2 daughters. So man, there's one of mine that is just, she's always like trying to please people like all the time. I see it with her friends. I see it even with us as parents. And I'm like, man, I'm like, we're trying to work on that with her. So she doesn't, grow up and, not be her true self. And like, we want her to kind of be herself and not worry so much about what other people think.
Yeah.
And, definitely as a teenager, that's a little tougher, right? During those years. But yeah, that definitely can be, it can be a challenge. And I think that really is the big take home from the book. And, thank you for sharing that message, because I think there's a lot of people that can resonate with some of those feelings that you may feel in comparison wise, especially with social media nowadays, Strava, right? It's like everyone gets in that comparison game. So it's important to note that if you want to live your true self and fullest to your abilities, that we need to get out of that. And then last but certainly not least, what is the eighth strategy there?
Yeah, seek out challenges and don't always play it safe. Before all of this, I was this very, very conservative runner, and I did not want to bonk in a race. And so I wouldn't really ever like take chances. And I remember when the first time I went into a race and I'm like, I may bonk in this half marathon, but that's okay, because otherwise there's no way I'm going to really know what I'm capable of. And I used to actually kind of judge those people. I'm like, well, they're not smart. They're just going to go out too fast and they're going to bonk. And it's just much smarter to just be conservative, which I mean, maybe it is. But at the same time, like you also have to learn how to take risks. And you don't always want to play it safe. And sometimes you just have to be bold. And if you don't challenge yourself, if you don't get out of that comfort zone, then you'll never really know what you can do. So you got to get out of that comfort zone. You got to do the hard thing. You have to just not be afraid to fail and just see what happens.
Yes, I love it. Not afraid to fail. And I think kind of speaking to that point, this was actually one of the questions that I had for you was really, one of the turning points that you mentioned in the book, and others have mentioned, like our friend Shauna, from Stiletto Running when she was on the show, of how much like a personal coach changed things for you in terms of your training and your running fitness. How did like investing in a coach help you during your 7-year journey to get a BQ?
Yeah, I invested in a personal coach. I want to say maybe 2-3 years after I had started sports psychology, and I think prior to that, like just given my mindset, I maybe wasn't even ready for a coach because I just didn't have the mental. Yeah, I feel like you got to get your mind straight before you can really go into it. But I got my coach in 2014, and it was a total game changer. It took out all of the guesswork. I was sort of injury prone, stress fractures, like hip things, foot things. A lot of races I couldn't do because I had these injuries. And then I got this coach, and for like the first 7-8 years of working with this coach, I didn't have an injury, at least not one that took me out for more than like 3 or 4 days, like no major injuries. And being able to train consistently and train smart and not get injured is, I think, the biggest key to success. And knowing when to push really hard and when to pull back is key. And I think having a coach is really just the best way to do it. I think, if you're a beginner runner, a one-size-fits-all plan might be fine, but the more and more experience you get, the more and more tailored and the more and more precise you have to be, and the more you sort of have to figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. So my coach is just absolutely amazing, and I set this big PR. Like I was struggling for years and years and years to get this BQ, which was 340, and I just could not get, for 7 years, I couldn't break 351 for 7 years. And then I went from like a 335 to a 321 in like, a year. So Right. It was this huge, big fitness jump. I took my half marathon time, which had been stayed at like 141 for years and years and years. And like within a season, I took that down to 135, and then the next year, 133, and then 132. It just, and he just really, really helped tailor the program and took all the guesswork out. So I didn't have to worry about, am I doing too much? Am I doing too little? Just a precise plan that took all the guesswork out.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. And, that's certainly a lot of the feedback we hear from our clients. But it was nice for you to kind of acknowledge that in the book. And it's nice to hear your experience in working with a coach now that can provide that structure and take away the guesswork. So since this is the Healthy Runner podcast, I know you've had some injuries in the past, but from your detailed race history on your website, by the way, which is amazing. You've been pretty much running, it seems, at least 2 marathons a year. So what is your secret to staying healthy and like consistently running?
Yeah, I think it's having a coach. I went to a physical therapist once. He said that almost all injuries, they're not from your biomechanics or from wrong shoes. I mean, he said 20% of them 20% of injuries are from that type of thing, but 80% of injuries are due to training error and overdoing it. And so my secret to being injury free is having a coach. As I just said, I try to do the little things like, the foam rolling and the strength training. And I just started working with a personal trainer, strength training coach specifically for runners. I started working with her in April of 2020. But prior to that, I didn't do a ton of strength training. I was sort of typically like full-time job, running, just don't have time for much else. So I wasn't very good about that. But now that I'm in my 40s, I think the strength training is super important because you don't recover quite as well as you age as I did when I was in my 20s. But yeah, the short answer is having a coach.
Yes. Oh my goodness. For those listening on the audio version on the podcast, if you watch the video version, I look like a bobblehead right now because I'm just like shaking my head to everything you say. I'm like, yes, preach, yes. Yeah. So those are all the things many people who have listened to this podcast have heard me preach about. So it's always just nice to hear that from someone else's experience in what you went through. And I know you have talked about in other areas or posts that I've seen kind of like the importance of the glutes and like how important it was like with even making tweaks in your running form and how much that changed some of your performance. And yeah, those things can definitely make a difference. But I agree. And that was actually the main reason why I became a running coach myself, is because I got honestly tired of just working as a physical therapist, just fixing injured runners, because it was the training errors that were bringing them into the clinic. So I wanted to learn more, right, about training and coaching. And, that's why I went down kind of the pathway that I have gone down. So kind of, I feel like I know like everything about your life in the 7-year journey in the book, but, is there anything that, you've learned since you wrote the book 6 years ago now that you would like to add to any of the 8 strategies that we had spoke about today?
I mean, I think the 8 strategies pretty much sums it up. I really have also embraced the taking it one day at a time approach. I don't talk about that as much in the book, but especially with COVID hitting and never sort of knowing the uncertainty that brought and dealing with uncertainty. And, I did have an injury right before Boston this year, and I had another injury last year. So for the first time, I'm actually sort of having more significant injuries. So dealing with uncertainty, not necessarily knowing what's going to happen, being comfortable with saying, I plan to run this race, not necessarily I'm going to run this race, but I'm planning on running this and I'm planning on running that, and realizing that it's good to have plans, but that they can always be changed and you can't always control that. So I would say, in the past 2, 3, 4 years, just being able to cope with uncertainty, taking things one day at a time, being present and enjoying the moment that you have, enjoying those healthy training runs, because definitely when you're injured, you realize, oh, that day that I complained about it being too hot on my easy run, what would I wouldn't give to go out in like 80 degrees right now and just run pain-free. So it just gives you a different perspective to enjoy the healthy days that you have out there.
Yeah, no, that's definitely appreciate what we have, right? And kind of I like that motto of kind of taking things as they go and being somewhat flexible to adjust the plan if need be. And then second to last question here is, what's next? I know you just ran Boston, and you got another amazing BQ, right? And what's next for you in terms of running journey? I don't know if you've shared that publicly yet, but
yeah, well, I sort of feel like, so I'm 43, I'm going to be 44 in November. And I feel like at some point I'm going to stop setting PRs. It's just kind of inevitable. So I feel like right now I maybe still can. I feel like I may have another 1, 2, 3, 4 years of PRing. So I feel like now is the time to be training properly, to continue working with a coach, and to really be giving it all I have to see what I can do to set my lifetime best. So I'm going to be running Indianapolis Monumental Marathon in the fall, and then I plan on doing Houston, which those are pretty tight. I usually don't do them so close together, but I think I can handle it. So yeah, my mindset now is like, all right, here we go. Let's see what those lifetime PRs are going to be. Let's see if I can squeak out another few minutes off the marathon PR, maybe another 20 seconds off that 5K PR. And then once I feel like I'm sort of done with PRs, then I think I'm going to enter sort of this new chapter of maybe doing, like, can we do more states, or can we, I don't know, do leader races, or right now I'm trying to be fast and flat. But once that's over, I'll be like hilly and adventurous. So that chapter will start when it starts, but we're not there yet.
Right. I love that. I love that. And so we're kind of coming down the final stretch here. It's the last question we ask all our guests. So it relates to our topic today, is really, if you can change, one thing about the misconception of overcoming mental barriers with running, what would that be?
The misconception of it, like, I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah. So I guess some people may, what are things that people are thinking of, oh, it's all in your head, or you just need to, I don't know. I could just think of like things I've heard people say, like toughen up, or stop thinking about it too much. Right. Or, how can someone kind of get over those barriers, or what are some of those things that you commonly hear, but that are not true based on your experience?
Yeah, when you think mental toughness and mental strength, you do exactly as you say. You think, you got to be strong, and a lot of times what that means is backing off. And it's very ironic, because in order to be mentally tough and mentally strong, you actually have to sort of relax the standards that you put on yourself. So sometimes being mentally strong is knowing that you're on the verge of an injury, and so you're going to skip your training run. And whereas people like, oh, mentally tough, you don't, your foot hurts, but you're going to power through. You're going to be mentally tough. No, mentally tough means it's going to be hard for you to not run because you're very goal oriented. And actually the harder thing to do is to do the smart thing and back off. So it's a little bit ironic, and you have to sort of remember that you're flipping that on its head, and being mentally strong doesn't necessarily look like always being like physically the strongest.
Yeah, that makes sense. So guys, really these 8 key principles to overcoming mental barriers that Elizabeth shared with us today for your running and your life. Just to kind of recap, she really talked about, one was like, separate yourself as a person from the things that you do. So besides running. 2 was focusing on things you can control, not those that you can't. Example we gave there was weather. 3 was like, don't speculate, set expectations on the process, not the outcome. So focusing more on those process goals versus the time on the clock when you cross the finish line, right? 4 was staying neutral, not getting too high, not getting too low, right? Like, don't let the emotions prevent you from doing your best when you go out there. 5 was seeking out positive emotions. So finding those things that were good, right? And the things that make you feel good, you had talked about. 6 was, when things don't go right and you have setbacks, like, all right, feel them, but move past them, right? We're going to forge ahead, get to that next step, think about what's next. Don't harp on it too long. 7, don't compare yourself to others. And that was like the biggest one we had talked about, is that comparison trap that we can all get into to a certain extent. And then 8 was really seeking out new challenges and not always playing it safe. I absolutely love these. Like once I got to that page yesterday and I was finishing up the book, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, yes, thank you for summarizing literally, the book there. But you guys will want to read the book because trust me, it was like a pleasurable experience hearing it from someone as they were going through it. And then also getting Elizabeth's reflection afterwards and really how she came about that epiphany and then how she made the change to really, not only, get the BQ, not only run Boston. And she talks about that experience in that race in the book, which was neat, but like to do it over and over and over again, right? Like clearly this wasn't just like a one-time thing. She's figured it out. So for those of you who are stuck and you're looking to figure it out, or you just want to prevent yourself from going down that kind of rabbit hole and really focusing too much on being, and putting too much pressure on yourself as a runner. And if you resonated with that and, how can others connect with you, Elizabeth? Where can they buy the book? Share all that good information with us, please.
Yeah. So on Instagram at Elizabeth Clor, all one word. And there's a link to the book there in my bio. And then www.elizabethclor.com is my blog, which has been going. It started as a MySpace blog in 2006. So the blog dates all the way back to 2006. If you want to read like 500 blog posts, you can. And then, the book is it's on Amazon. So you can just search Elizabeth Clor Boston Bound on Amazon and the book will pop up.
Awesome. Guys, go get the book. We've already had people here on the Facebook Live. Coach Whitney says she's already ordered hers. Katya's bought the book 5 seconds ago. A lot of people are resonating with your message. I highly recommend it, whether or not you want to read it before bed or you want to read it on the beach, for your summer vacations. Go ahead and do that. Elizabeth, this has been so much fun. Like it's been great just getting to speak with you after reading about your journey. Thank you so much for accepting the invite when I shot you that DM and Instagram there, and sharing these like valuable tips on overcoming mental barriers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's been great.
Yeah. And I look forward to following your continued running journey. And thank you to you listeners who have been tuning in, whether or not you're watching kind of the replay within our Healthy Runner Facebook group or our Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel. I appreciate all of you guys. Make sure you go ahead and follow Elizabeth's Instagram account. At Elizabeth Clor and buy the book. I'm going to put all of her links in the show notes as well. Remember, every week we do these podcast episodes we live within our Healthy Runner Facebook group. We'd love for you to join and interact and ask your questions. So check out our events tabs within our group and you'll see all the guests and the topics coming up. So as always, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and just keep running. Until next time.